All right, there we go. I take that back. All right, there we go. Now I think we have everybody muted. Thank you again for joining us for our Navient presented seminar on key strategies for best-in-class accounts payable. My name is Guy Schrader. I'll be one of your presenters. I'm Manager of Sales Engineering with Navient. And with me in the same room, looking across the table from me, is Ed Majeska. He is the Director of Strategic Accounts at Navient. And just a few house cleaning items for the webinar. Everybody is now muted, so if you do have any questions, please use the chat panel that you see within the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of the screen. We will have some polls during the presentation, so please take some time to answer those questions for some feedback during the presentation, and also there will be a survey at the completion of this webinar. Please take the time to answer that so that we can better serve you in the future with the webinar content that we put together. So without any further ado, we're going to jump into this. Obviously we have 30 minutes, so we're going to be going at a relatively fast pace here. First off, we always like to take a look at some of the industry metrics and benchmarks so that you understand how other organizations are measuring their accounts payable performance. And looking at some of the different surveys that have been done, you'll see Accounts Payable Network popping up here and there. A majority of organizations use some level of metrics to gauge their AP performance, and the larger the organization, the more likely that you use some level of metrics to measure your performance. And these are some of the top metrics that people responded with: volume of invoices, on-time payment, your days payable outstanding, cost per invoice, turnaround time, first pass rate, so on and so forth. Again, in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and focus on just a couple of these that we feel are very key metrics to really measure your performance in the accounts payable world. So we're going to go ahead and pop up a poll really quick here. Let me see if I can get that going. All right, there we go. You should see a poll on your screen at this point in time asking the question, how many invoices per month do each of your full-time equivalent accounts payable clerks process? Either you might have no idea if you're not privy to that information, less than 1,000, in the range of 1,000 to 2,000, between 2,000 to 3,000, or more than 3,000. So please take a moment to go ahead and answer that question for us. And I'm watching the results as they come in here. In general, it appears that a majority of folks at this point in time see either be less than 1,000 invoices on a monthly basis per FTE, or 1,000 to 2,000 invoices. I have one respondent or a couple of respondents with more than 3,000. A number of you really have no idea. So thank you for sharing that information. So how this equates to things, some of the surveys that have been done, the Accounts Payable Network did a survey where they managed how many invoices were processed per FTE and kind of put them into different quartiles, saying the first quartile really is the best-in-class performers. In those organizations, they're stating that a best-in-class organization can process about 2,500 invoices per FTE. If you're in the middle of the pack, that median range, about 1,400 invoices per month. If you're in the laggard category, or that third quartile, about 680 invoices on a monthly basis per FTE. So you can see that world-class organizations, best-in-class, can process nearly 3.7 times as many invoices per FTE versus those laggards. So one more quick poll that I'm going to go ahead and pop up here. So for your organization, what's the cost to process an invoice? Again, you might not be privy to that information, so I give you an out on this particular survey. More than $10 per invoice, between $5 and $10 per invoice, $2.50 to $5 per invoice, or less than $2.50 per invoice. So a vast majority do not have that information at this point in time. You have no idea. There is a small percentage, less than $2.50 per invoice, and a few other respondents saying between $2.50 and $5 per invoice. And we'll go ahead and stop it at that point in time. So again, Those people that have an understanding of their cost per invoice, the majority of you are saying less than $5 per invoice. Thank you again for taking the time to answer those questions. So again, looking at the survey results, and this time I'm looking at a number of different surveys, the Accounts Payable Network, Aberdeen Group, the Institute of Financial Operations. All of them have done some different studies on the cost to process an invoice. Again, looking at these different categories, the first quartile, you can see there's some variance in the dollar figures, but in general, less than $4 per invoice. I think you can probably do some rounding and say roughly $3 per invoice or better if you are a best-in-class organization. Again, the middle of the road, you're talking about $5 to just short of $10, and that laggard category, $11 and well beyond. This brings up a very interesting point. Why do we have all this variability to the cost? There are a number of different considerations, and nobody really measures all of their costs to process an invoice 100% the same. So you obviously have your labor that goes into it. Some people calculate the department overhead. Some even go to the point of saying, how much time does it take my managers to review my non-PO-based invoices? All the costs for processing errors, duplicate handling, missing your discounts. If you use some outsourced services, some transaction-based fees, paper or storage, software licenses if you have different systems that are managing managing the process as well as hardware maintenance. So there's no real science to it. It's a little bit of an art, frankly, to capture these costs. The key is manage it and use the same metrics as you go through the process so that you can measure your performance improvement over time. But you can see here, based upon that prior chart that we have, there can be highly quantifiable savings here. Just starting at a low level of invoices, if you process 100,000 invoices on the left-hand side on an annual basis, the front column is your savings. If you're able to move from the median organization to the best-in-class, that first quartile, you're talking about an annual savings of $250,000. Obviously, extrapolate that over higher volumes, and your cost savings only go up even more. So here's one quick example of one of our customers that we've dealt with where they came to us saying that our benchmark cost per invoice is $4.91. Not bad, probably in that median category, but on the lower end of that range. That after we worked with them, implementing best practices, implementing some technologies to go ahead and improve performance, first year we were able to see the cost drop to $2.20 per invoice, and we're currently in year 5 of that implementation where we've seen the actual cost decline to $1.62 per invoice with a little bit of additional savings. So you can see an initial drop-off, and then as you continue to tweak your processes and improve performance, you can still eke even more sense out of the entire process. So how do you achieve that best-in-class? And this is what some of the industry analysts have come up with. Centralize your processing. Again, a number of organizations have realized that, and we're seeing over 82% of organizations are doing central processing, and they're using that shared services model. Automate that process. Again, there's still room for improvement here. Only 16% of the respondents to these surveys have reported a high level of automation. Most people are in that medium category. Larger organizations with higher invoice volumes are more likely to report that higher automation. Integrate with your ERP system. 77% stated that they're fully integrated. And a byproduct of all this is that you standardize the process. Every invoice goes through that structured process where you improve the cycle times, lower your invoice costs, and improve your visibility into the entire process. Automate your data capture is the last piece here also. We all realize that probably the most laborious piece to accounts payable processing is taking that information off of the piece of paper or the image and keying that into our ERP system. 43% of organizations responded stating that they have deployed some level of automated data capture, and we'll talk about that a little bit further here. So who's adapted some of these different automation components? The front-end imaging piece, scanning invoices upon receipt. You can see that depending upon the size of the organization, the orange is the large organization, blue, medium size, green is the smaller organization. Again, the larger that you are, the more likely that you're implementing some front-end imaging, optical character recognition we'll talk about a little bit, automated workflow, making sure every invoice follows the same process, electronic payments, P-cards, electronic invoicing. You can see how different organizations have actually implemented these different technologies. So with that, we're going to go into the automation concepts and stages, and I'm going to turn it over to Ed Majeska to speak.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Guy. Well, Guy just did a great job at sharing, the last slide, what solutions are being adopted by different organizations, kind of the trends there. But often the question is, and that's really what this slide addresses, is why are they doing it? What were the objectives of the AP organizations? And not satisfied with a simple top 10, we put together this top 11 list, and in no particular order. Interestingly enough, very often the number one item on this often bubbles to the top is simply it's a paper problem. We're trying to reduce our storage costs or our retrieval costs. We don't want to have people manually looking in file cabinets or boxes or in storage facilities for this information. But really everything else on here, we hear on a pretty regular basis. Everything from lowering process costs, not specifically reducing head count, but increasing productivity and reducing manual effort. Often things like reducing duplicate payments, increasing visibility and reporting. Something that's actually not on this, probably at number 12, is truly global enterprise standardization, having a consistent process across the organization when there's multiple regions, multiple divisions, etc. So where does ECM fit in, and what is ECM? ECM is Enterprise Content Management, and the simple way that many people think about it is document imaging. I have paper and I'm going to scan that. The reality is it is much, much more than that. ECM is really the broad approach to the capture, storage, retrieval, integration, measurement, reporting of all unstructured content that relates to these transactions. It's not just the invoices. It could be the emails. It could be voicemails. It could be ancillary content related to that invoice transaction that's not being stored in the ERP. So as you think about all of those other things, that's typically what we relate to or refer to as unstructured content. ECM is managing that. Again, it's capturing, storage, retrieving, integrating, etc., wherever and whenever that information exists. So the question often asked then is why, if that's what ECM is, why is it important? And again, the simple answer here is it fits into the enterprise information strategy of most organizations. Most organizations have a line of business or multiple key line of business applications. This is actually a slide from an actual customer of ours that has three primary ERPs, SAP, Oracle, and Epicor being from a legacy acquisition of theirs. They also use SharePoint, they use Office and Outlook, and have multiple mobile devices. The reality is those line of business applications are great for user interfaces, where your users kind of interact on a daily basis. And what they're designed to do is to manage that structured data, that master data model, very efficiently. However, what they're not really designed to do well is to manage document-centric or ECM-centric processes. And so that's where ECM comes in, is often transparently, it provides that enhanced functionality to those line of business applications, those ERPs, or to emails, or to portals, to eliminate the need for, or the resulting for document silos, eliminating the need to create and maintain multiple ERP workflow customizations, the ability to leverage, as Guy mentioned earlier, one standard consistent process regardless of what the business region or ERP might be, and really essentially let the software do what it was designed to do. Let those data-centric applications like the ERP manage the data, and let the document-centric applications and processes be managed by that ECM. And to do that, there's really 7 considerations when we work with organizations, and it's going to be impossible to go into this in depth in a short 30-minute webinar, but we'll take a very high-level look. But these are those 7 considerations we look at: is where is that content being captured? Is there need or a fit for some advanced automation for recognition? And we'll talk about OCR a little bit later. Once we have that captured and recognized, how do we process it? What are our exceptions? How do we integrate that? How are the users going to access it? What reporting key metrics are we going to use to measure it? And from a retention and security standpoint, how are we going to store that content? So those are those high-level considerations. So once that is all mapped out from a current state and a future state, as we work with various organizations around the country and around the globe and look at all these different options, we typically see these 4 concepts being manifested in general terms. So as you would expect, as you move from left to right, as the cost of invoice reduces as that automation increases. So starting on the far left, it's typically something that is going to be, as we call late scanning. Essentially, your processes are going to be very manual still. You're going to push around invoices manually, ad hoc. Even if you're scanning them, you're going to push them around in email via more of an uncontrolled process. Whereas at the end of that process, once everything is done essentially manually, they're being stored, late scanning. So the advantage there for some organizations is that paper problem, we're getting rid of the storage and we're increasing our retrievals. Past that, the bulk of everything is still manual. As you move to 2 and 3, and I'll kind of talk to those together, it's really shifting that capture as early as possible in the process. As soon as those invoices are received via email, fax, or paper, they're getting scanned or electronically ingested, and oftentimes in a centralized way, I touched upon that earlier, such that there is some level of automation, some level of automated workflow that controls those processes and approvals. So that's really the difference between stage 2 and 3 is the amount of workflow automation that is typically being applied and amount of automated verifications and posting that's available based on that workflow automation. And then stage 4 is really, I would say, from our experience, really a best-in-class, as appropriate based on invoice volumes of your organization. It's adding that level of OCR, optical character recognition, to automatically extract that line item information without templates, and we'll talk about that too, such that that manual effort of reading and keying invoice line item detail and doing that validation is eliminated or mostly eliminated from your process. So as we think about all of that, and I know that's a lot to absorb in a quick 2-3 minutes, we've kind of boiled it down for this webinar to 3 best practices for AP from a non-technical, product-agnostic perspective, and we'll talk more about this, but it's really, we talked about this quite a bit, early capture and process automation, user transparency, and then reducing or eliminating keying. So focusing on the first one, early capture and process automation, as Guy mentioned, the bottom of this slide, really centralization. Approximately 80% are either organizations that we're working with or seeing industry trends are either centralized or partially centralized to help them reduce costs. Capturing those invoices centrally and then processing it in a standardized, consistent way, regardless of where your users are, because they can be disparate if this is an automated electronic process. Additionally, by capturing as early as possible, you're eliminating the need to print just to scan, and you're able to route that in an automated way and provide business rules and controls around those invoices. Further, if we capture early, again, things like automated schedule of authority, approvals, exceptions can be provided. Typically, notifications, routings, timers, if something's sitting, let's say in a non-PO approval or a PO exception queue for too long based on your business rules, timers can be implemented to send notifications back to the user, to the user's boss. We can do workload balancing, and it provides a full audit trail. The other thing that we're seeing come into play more and more is mobile workflow, providing the ability to users to be able to view and interact with those approvals or exceptions via their iPad, their Android device, etc. So the next slide I really want to walk through is just a very, very high level of kind of what that process might look like. So as those invoices arrive either electronically or via paper, they're ingested, captured electronically, or scanned, if they were truly paper, into that ECM, so moving left to right. At that point in time, in one scenario, and this is all process-driven by your organization, those would be or could be presented to that AP specialist for review. If it's a PO transaction that's simply, and again, this is a non-OCR type of process example, if it's as simple as they're going to key that information in, they would still key that into their ERP, typically from dual monitors, so I'm kind of following the path working down for a second here. So typically dual monitors, they'd have the invoice on one being controlled by the ECM. They would have the ERP on the second screen, key that in, and then share that data with the ERP, and that ERP and ECM would then be in sync. Moving back up to that AP specialist review, if it's something that is a PO exception or a non-PO approval necessary, that would then push out via workflow, and those approvals would automated, typically schedule of authority to the point where it comes back for AP review if needed, or simply push out for a commit and a batch file processing back to that ERP again. Second transition I'd like to move to is user transparency. Again, real key. We're big on not pushing users to applications that they're not familiar with, which is another reason why a lot of organizations will not typically use an ERP workflow to facilitate AP automation, because you're driving business users who are typically not familiar, or you don't want to pay for ERP licenses for those users to interact. Or if you have multiple ERPs, it's forcing people to go into multiple ERPs and multiple customizations. So by providing this transparency, oftentimes we can push out that image or the interaction with that image or the workflow processing with that image directly into the ERP via the ECM, so that it's transparent to the users, that AP specialist. So things like retrieval, seeing related documents, being able to complete as necessary for non-PO transaction approvals or PO exceptions via electronic forms, being able to see workflow status, transaction posting, all being done as though it appears being done by the ERP, but the ECM is essentially facilitating that in the background transparency. Additionally, on the bottom of the slide, you'll see we're seeing a big push towards not just mobile, as I mentioned before, but to email is a big push. So, send that user an email, not with a link to drive them someplace else, but let them facilitate their approvals directly in that email and do their schedule of authority routing and do their GL coding right in that email. As I mentioned, mobile device and email application, we're just kind of talking about that. Lots of scenarios where we're seeing that different applications, iPhone, iPad, Android, Windows, BlackBerry, Outlook, Lotus Notes, GroupWise. I think we've just about seen them all. But again, it's all about keeping those users in their native applications.
So I'm going to jump in here as we talk about the third piece here, reducing or eliminating that keying. Again, that's the most laborious piece oftentimes in AP processing. And as we talk about the introduction of an ECM system here, oftentimes people think, well, I don't want to do that because I still have to key into my ERP system, then I have to index this document in my ECM system. Well, there's a number of different key from image enhancements that are available that allow us to effectively screen scrape information from the ERP system and utilize that information for indexing the document within the ECM system. And again, that allows us just to enter that information once. If we're still within that manual data entry paradigm, we can go ahead and validate that information, reducing the errors that actually are taking place. Dual monitors, as Ed had mentioned, are almost integral in implementing this. Taking that to the next level, if we have the appropriate volumes of invoices, we can start talking about that optical character recognition. That's what OCR stands for, into the process. And there's a couple different levels of that. And we're not talking about everything that's available within OCR and the time constraints that we have for this webinar, but really two things that we want to talk about. Zonal OCR has been on the market for a long point in time. Effectively, zonal OCR means that you have to have documents that have a static structure and where we're going to go ahead and create templates or zones for the extraction of information from these known documents. May work well in a scenario for your organization if you have a high percentage of invoices coming from a very limited number of vendors, where you can take something like this where you have the example of an invoice coming from the phone shack. You can recognize the type of document that it is based upon a zone, like where invoice appears there, and then we apply a template saying, oh, this must be Phone Shack's invoice, where I know I can grab the vendor, my invoice number, my dates, my line item details, my PO number, and effectively map that into discrete data fields that then could be utilized for posting into your ERP system, as well as used for workflow logic within an enterprise content management system. Again, very niche use. You have to have a high number of invoices from a very small number of vendors to make this efficient. Otherwise, setting up templates for thousands of different vendors is not realistic. The next level is what we call advanced OCR, or intelligent data capture. In that scenario, the software has been adapted a bit. It's still using OCR technology, but we're looking at unstructured data and documents, which is the perfect fit for invoices coming from hundreds, if not thousands, of different vendors. The system is able to recognize information through advanced search technologies. There's no need to set up different zones and different templates for the different types of documents that you receive. We're going to automatically extract and classify these documents and pull the information off based upon some characteristics of the information that's surrounding the data that appears on the page. For example, a PO number is going to be typically somewhere on the top half of the document, but where? With the human eye, we can find that relatively quickly, but software needs to recognize that there's going to be a tag of PO number, purchase order num, so on and so forth, for a tag typically above or to the left of it, and since it's your PO number, you know the specific format of it. So it has the capability of recognizing that information and then applying different rules to make sure that we're extracting the appropriate header and footer, as well as the line item details, and validate that information against your ERP system, because OCR technologies, even though they've been around for a while, are still not perfect. They will come up with different errors, so it's very important that we validate that information against your ERP system. But by utilizing some of this technology, that allows us to get to the point where we can do some straight-through processing of invoices, where from the point in time that somebody imports that document or drops that document in the scanner, it automatically is posted to your ERP system. So really quick, just to kind of talk through this with a graphical of how this works, the software is able to go ahead and read through a document like this. And again, it's not a template, but it's able to recognize based upon the dollar amounts and where this information is located, what's an invoice number, what's the vendor name, what's the PO number, so on and so forth. But we also have to take that information and now, for example, based upon that PO number, look across your ERP, or in this scenario, multiple different ERPs, saying, okay, let's go ahead and find that PO number, effectively return back the information from your ERP system so that we can now start doing staging things to do that three-way match of a PO-based invoice, allowing the system to do the best that it can do with any exceptions or any rules being broken being presented to an end user to go ahead and correct that information. So really the core benefits to this advanced OCR is that you're really eliminating a lot of those non-value added tasks of your users. Taking away that data entry, allow them to get involved only for that data validation where there might be issues that the software brought back or flagged for attention. Your processing times go down. It's really the most complex system that's out there. It can meet all of your complex requirements, and best-in-class organizations really are using this. Given there is a higher cost to this, but there is a much higher return on investment also, so it's key to focus on as we look at this. So really just summarizing very quickly as we're wrapping things up here. Your enterprise content management and business process management, I know we haven't talked about BPM yet, but kind of roll that into the big ECM bubble. It's a strategic initiative. You really need to engage leadership and really help build that vision within your organization for utilizing that. Centralize your processing wherever possible. That really allows you to improve a lot of your controls and reporting. Obviously, it eliminates some of your redundant operations across the different divisions. Capture your documents early in the process, and where appropriate, automate the process. You have a natural audit trail then from the point in time that document is in the system. Who touched it? What action did they take upon that? So you now have all this nice visibility and metrics to measure your performance. Let the system work for you and integrate where appropriate. Take that indexing away from the manual users, make that retrievable seamless from the different line of business applications that you utilize. Match your documents, your line items, do the posting, allow the workflow to do your work for you, so on and so forth. Really taking your AP staff now and getting more value out of them rather than heads-down data entry type of people. So we really feel it's important that your process planning is critical here. We need to understand what your current state is, where you envision that your future state is, what metrics are we going to use to get there, and we use a two-phase mentality. You need to go through a planning phase initially, identify what the solution design is before you make any type of investment in the technology. Make sure that your requirements match the technology that you're going to be positioning to go ahead and address that particular problem. I know that was a whirlwind tour in 30 minutes. We will stick around and answer any questions that you might have on the GoToMeeting panel. I'm sorry, Ed, did you want?
Yes, I flip one more. Just for everyone's benefit, a quick invite before you drop off. We do hold an annual summit, ECM Leadership Summit. This year we move it around a bit. This year we're proud to announce that it is at the Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee. It is free to our customers and guests. We only ask that you register on our website so that we can plan for headcounts and meals and all those type of things. So if you'd like to learn more, obviously, as Guy was mentioning, we can stick around, answer any questions. You can shoot us an email, or please, we'd encourage you to visit with us and visit with other like-minded customers. They're doing similar things at the summit in October. So thank you again.
Yeah, thank you very much. Again, if there are any questions, please use the questions panel within the GoToWebinar panel that appears on the right side of your screen typically. We will stick around for the next few minutes. But again, thank you very much for taking 30 minutes of your busy day and attending this webinar. Everybody have a great day. Thanks.